sort of the sequence what we discussed. Okay. Over to you, Pritesh.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Pritesh Chauhan, the Head of Community here at Sedex, and welcome to the second keynote of the conference today. Global efforts to tackle the problem of forced labour include new laws and regulations, as well as new benchmarking initiatives aimed at highlighting the best and worst practices amongst companies. Companies face serious legal and reputational risks if they do not take effective action to prevent forced labour in their global supply chains. This session focuses on standards, frameworks, and best practices for identifying and eradicating forced labour in supply chains, and offers recommendations of proactive and cooperative steps that companies can take to ensure that suppliers do not engage in, contribute to, or tolerate forced labour. You're going to hear from Ms. Bharati Birla, Chief Technical Advisor for Sustainable Global Supply Chains in South Asia at the ILO. She will share ILO's labour standard frameworks and share findings from recent supply chain research and offer some best practices. And then you'll hear from Mr. Anand Bolimera, Chief Executive Officer at Change Alliance, who will talk about the best practices and recommendations on improving workers' health and migrant worker conditions from an NGO perspective, and share some studies from their on-the-ground teams. So I'd like to hand over now to Ms. Birla.
Thank you so much, Pritesh. Thank you for having me here. I'm going to talk today a little bit about the workers who are the invisible workers in the supply chains. We do know a lot about the workers who are in the factories, where the international frameworks as well as the national standards, national legislations reach. But the challenges that I'm going to talk about today is about the invisible workers in the global supply chains, and how do we make these global supply chains more fair and sustainable. For me, I just want to begin this session with your attention on a report that was prepared by ITUC. The name of the report is Scandal Inside the Supply Chains of Top 50 Companies. Now, this is something that Pritesh also spoke about in the beginning. It's about the reputational risk that happens to the organizations, to the companies when it comes to issues of forced labor, child labor. So this report actually focused on the invisible workforce within the global supply chains. What it said was that inside the global supply chains, inside the companies of these 50 companies, they make a revenue of around $3.4 trillion. Now, how much is $3.4 trillion? It's little less than India's GDP. It is equal to the wealth of 100 small countries. This is what we are talking about. And in this global supply chain, around 6% of the workers are the visible workers who work in formal factories, but 94%, the huge workforce, actually remains hidden part of the workforce. They are part of the supply chain, but are not regular workers, not formal workers. And this is around 116 million people that we are talking about. And this covers everywhere. It covers the entire globe. And what is also important to understand is that not just this, 60% of the global trade comes from the major corporations. So major corporations are also responsible for generating jobs, creating employment, creating livelihood, and this is very important. The role of job creation is very, very critical to both to the countries where these work come. But the question is, how do we make this work more fair, more sustainable, and more decent? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, to begin sort of to have a comprehension of how the things work, I want to share with you a small study from the same ITUC report. You all buy t-shirts, you buy shoes, you buy garments. All of these things are made as part of the global supply chain. Now, you as a consumer would buy a t-shirt in a European market, say for 29 euros, and this t-shirt is manufactured, for example, in Bangladesh. Now, the question is, what is the cost breakup of this t-shirt? What really entails the entire cost? Now, if you look at the overhead cost, which goes into the t-shirt making, is around 0.9%, which is fair. It includes transport, which is around 8%, because it's manufactured in Bangladesh and transported to the European market. The cost of the material is around 12%, 3.4 euro. The cost of commissions, intermediaries who get involved in the entire process, 4% commission, 4% cost goes to intermediaries, which is around 1.2 euros. Now, how much does a Bangladesh factory makes? Does it make too much money, or it doesn't? It actually only makes 4% profits out of this t-shirt. That's around 1.15 euros. Now, the question is how much brands make? Well, brands make around 12%. That's around 3.61 euros. So where does the big profit goes to? And how much does a worker get? These are the two things that we really need to understand in supply chains. Well, the retail who sells the product, who sells the t-shirt, gets around 60% of the profits. That's where the entire profit is situated. And how much does a worker get in a formal export-oriented Bangladeshi company, a Bangladeshi factory which is manufacturing this t-shirt? How much does that worker get? Well, that worker only gets around 0.18 euro. That's it, and no more. Now, this is really worrisome, because when you're talking about global supply chains, we also need to make sure that the work is decent. The workers in a factory gets 1.18 euros. How much would a worker who's part of the homework or the industrial home workers or the hidden workers that I'm talking about, how much would they get? Just to give you an example, I was visiting one of the factories in Tamil Nadu in Tirupur, and there was a woman who was making clothes for children, for infants. And she told me that, I'm making this beautiful t-shirt for children, but I know that it will be sold in the foreign market, and I will never be able to afford this t-shirt for my own child, even though I'm the one who's making it. Now, if this is what happens in factories, I want to take you further down the supply chain to the hidden workers that I'm talking about. Now, who are these hidden workers? You as a consumer buy the t-shirt from the retail store. It is manufactured by brands. It comes to the medium and large enterprises in the global south, for example, in India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Vietnam, Indonesia. The work goes from these large and medium enterprises to small enterprises, and from these small enterprises goes to subcontractors. Because flexibility is needed in the supply chain. It's seasonal. You cannot have so many people in the factory all the time because of the seasonal production, and because of the flexibility, because of the skills that are needed in the supply chains. And slowly it reaches the informal workers who are in the informal home-based or micro enterprises, and it reaches the home-based workers, or what we call as the industrial home workers. Now, these are the industrial home workers or the informal workers from Tirupur who are engaged in global supply chain. They cut threads, they do embellishments, they pack, they put zippers, they do all the odd kinds of jobs which are needed for the production. And these production chains are all across from different industries, every industry, from pharmaceutical to garments to apparels to leather to tourism. Everyone uses informal and home workers, which are very critical part of the supply chains, whether those are global supply chains or domestic supply chains. Now, usually the work that is done by these home workers is perceived to be safe. But in reality, the picture that you see, the woman is making carpet in her home. This is a picture from Nepal, and I saw this young baby sitting with her, and you can see the working conditions. The other picture that you see is workers making statues, brass statues. These workers use gold to polish the statues. They use hydrochloric acid, they use mercury, but most of them are not even aware that mercury is such a dangerous thing for them. All the time they keep hearing the tuck-tuck sound which goes on. So the working conditions are pathetic. The last picture that you see, I was actually in the room, and she makes metal beads which are used in different products, and the metal beads have two parts and they have to be soldered together using flame. And as she was trying to show us what she does, the gas cylinder leaked. We were in a small attic on the second floor of the house. and we were 3 people inside that small space, and the gas cylinder started leaking. We tried to close the gas cylinder and walk out of the attic. And the moment we were trying to walk out, we saw the bottle of hydrochloric acid just next to the door. It was a glass bottle. It could have just broken because we were all trying to rush out from that room. And her 2 small daughters were also with us. So this perception that home-based work is safe is not really true. Workers are working with chemicals, they're working in dangerous working conditions, and children and the entire family gets exposed to these challenges. You look at the wages and income, the piece rate wages normally do not align to the notified minimum wages in the countries. The work done by women and men, the men's work is perceived to be more skilled. They are paid a little higher wages, even though they're still less than piece rate wages, but still, at least they get something more than the women. But the women's work is considered to be low skilled. And here there's a worker in Nepal trying to present, the work on Tanka paintings. And each Tanka paintings, as you must be aware, sells for 1 lakh to 2 lakh rupees. But what do the workers get in this whole profit? They are the ones who are making the designs. They're making the entire intellectual property, so as to say, the artistic part of it, but they don't get that. They don't get any benefit of that. And the work done by women is not even recognized as skilled work. There is gap in data, there's gap in statistics. Home workers are usually seen as self-employed workers or own account workers and are not seen as employees within the global supply chains or domestic supply chains. So another big issue as part of the supply chains is that it's dominated by women. A lot of the workforce is women, and women themselves do not perceive themselves as workers. They do not say that I'm a worker. They do not demand these. And many times, many occupations, even like Tanka painting or the picture that you see here, a woman is actually etching metal. It is generally seen as hard work, as highly skilled work, and people say only men do it. But when you go into the lanes of Muradabad, you see that many women are doing the work which is perceived to be done by men. So this whole gap in data, whole gap in statistics is very, very critical. And unless we understand this, we will not be able to change the situation. Another important point then when we talk about issues of forced labor, child labor, is to blame the chain below, chain which is informal, chain which comprises of agents, chains which comprises of sub-agents, commission agents who bring the work from enterprises to the workers. Often many reports talk about how these agents take the wages away from worker, do not pay the workers. But the picture that you see here is from Bareilly, India. On the top, you can see the finished work, which was done by the women in the village. It's lying in the house of the agent. The enterprise which gave them work has not taken the work back. They have told them that it has been rejected. So, but the agent still had to pay the home-based workers because there was community pressure. So the entire loss comes on the agent themselves, and these agents were workers before. So it's not that they're someone who's making a lot of money, but they were workers who sort of learned the skills and now have become agents. The picture that you see on the bottom, the actual agent is dead. He had a heart attack. He had a heart attack because he was given 6 checks by the company who gave him work, and all the 6 checks have bounced. He has already made the payment to the workers who did the work. And now the family is struggling with his death, as well as the money that they own to the workers. So this is the situation also of the agents and sub-agents below. Now, if this is the situation, what can we do? What can we do as a group? But what can we do? I think the first issue that we really need to do is to acknowledge the issue and discuss the issue. It's very critical to have a social dialogue where the employers, workers, and government sit together. This is a very complex issue, and we cannot really handle this alone. No one actor in the supply chain can do it alone. It has to be a joint effort. It has to be a progressive effort, incremental efforts towards making supply chains more sustainable. So these are some of the pictures that you see from our workshop where the tripartite partners have participated, and not just the tripartite partners, the partnership with civil society, with academia, with media, with multi-stakeholder initiatives. They play a very critical role in changing the entire situation. And we need to see how do we balance the needs of the business, balance the needs of the workers, and balance the needs of the government. All three have different needs. Businesses create jobs, they need profits. That's why they're there. And the workers need to have a right to income, right to employment, but that employment should be in conditions of decent work. The government wants business because it creates funds, it generates taxes, and the taxes are again used back in development work. So all these actors have a very critical role to play in the global supply chains or in the supply chains of production and services. But the question is, how do we need to sit together and work? Now, what we have learned in the work that we have been doing, and what could be the recommendations from the government side, the recommendations to the governments is to look at how they can enhance the visibility and recognition of the workers in the lower tiers of the supply chain, how the data can be strengthened, how the labor force surveys capture these workers, how the law and policy addresses these workers, because most of the national legislations apply to the formal workers where employment relationship is visible. But in these workers, they're part of the informal supply chain, and this employment relationship is disguised, is invisible. So how do we reach to these invisible workers? By enabling their data, enabling their statistic, making sure that legislations apply, and also policy focus is on enabling decent work for these workers, enabling social protection for them so that the pressure on the enterprises decreases. The second part which government can look is in transitioning from informality to formality. How incentives can be given to enterprises so that they move from informal sector to the formal sector, because formal sector workers also have benefits which are available to regular workers. And that also takes away a lot of pressure on the brands to make sure that the supply chains are transparent, because they know that the work will be subcontracted to a formal enterprise, even though it is smaller, but it is formal and there are processes. There is an implementation of the national legislation that happens. And third is about sustaining jobs and enterprises. That's also the role of the government. From the brands and businesses, the focus is on improving the accountability and responsibility down the supply chain. There are many brands today who are trying to map their supply chains and trying to see who are the actors. My recommendation to you is that when you see that home workers and micro enterprises are involved, don't stop the work. Don't put pressure to the enterprises not to give work to home workers. Recognize that there are home workers, because for them, this is an important source of employment, but try to see how these workers can be enabled better wages and better working conditions. How can you improve business practices? How can you make sure that the companies know that there is a piece of embroidery that is going to come after 3 months, and you would need 100 workers to work on that piece, so that the smaller businesses can organize production in a more meaningful way? How you can promote labor law compliance within your own supply chain, and not just the tier 1, but also tier 2 and tier 3. To the workers' organizations, the recommendation is to organize and unionize workers, promote workers' education, because most of the unions work with formal workers, but organizing informal workers is really, really tedious. And the unions and membership-based organizations who do this know this challenge, because they're not part of a large factory. You cannot address 100 workers at a time. You have to go individually to the homes. And most of these workers, as I said, do not even recognize themselves as workers. They don't think that they are workers. So workers' education is critical, and membership-based organizations, workers' rights organizations need to engage in policy advocacy to have the voice and representations of the workers within the policy discussions and social dialogue. The last slide that I have, and a suggestion to the civil society, media, and academia, is to look at how we can do evidence-based research. All of you do that, and that's very critical to inform how the policies should be designed, how the laws need to be strengthened. And this evidence-based research is very critical. The policy advocacy that you do is important, is critical, and that we really need. But this policy advocacy needs to be more nuanced, more lessons that we learn from the field need to go into the policy advocacy around a rights-based framework. So with that, I will sort of conclude my presentation. This is a picture of a worker, and when we were clicking this, this was part of a photo contest that ILO had organized. And when the photographer was actually clicking her picture and asked her what her inspirations were and where would she want this picture to be clicked, so she said, I want this picture to be clicked behind, in front of these dollar notes. And he asked why, and she said that, look, I want to earn in dollars one day, and that's my inspiration. That's what I want to do. I do a lot of this work, but one day I should be able to afford what I'm doing. I should be able to get it for myself. So with that, I would sort of close my presentation and also encourage you to think about these workers when you buy any product, whether it's a watch, whether it's a t-shirt, whether it's a shoe. Just think about these workers and see how we can make this global supply chains more sustainable and more fair for these invisible workers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing your stories. Such an interesting and powerful perspective on the challenges for the percentage of the workforce that you said are invisible. So thank you for that and the recommendations that you've offered for all of us in the various capacities that we have. I'll now hand over to Mr. Anand Bilimera for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pritesh. Thank you, Bharti. Actually, you made my task much simpler, and you have already touched several of the stakeholders and their work, what they're trying to do. So, Pritesh, please confirm me whether you're able to see the screen.
Yes, we can. If you could put it in presentation mode, it'd be better for viewing.
Okay, Pritesh, can you confirm me?
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pritesh. I would like to take that opportunity to thank Sedex, Vishal and friends for giving this opportunity. And also special thanks to Bharti for making such a wonderful presentation covering all aspects of the work. And this particular panel is trying to bring the voices of the civil society. So it's quite an important element. And I don't take much time, but I think the context is very, very clear for us, most of us. This is about the whole aspect of the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights, where it talks about state duty to protect and corporate responsibility to respect and access to effective remedy. So that's a very, very, very clear. And also we have sustainable developmental goals where many of us have made a commitment, and it includes not the states alone, and it's the private sector and everyone. So therefore there are various aspects that's already taken it up. And I would like to spend a minute on the, especially the national guidelines on responsible business conduct. And while forwarding that, our Prime Minister Narendra Modi has given a very important message, is asking that the business has a potential for inclusive socio-economic transformation. Of course, we call the Gandhian philosophy of trusteeship and the responsibility towards the society. But even in the previous panel, in fact, it also talked about the various, the national NGRBC guidelines, especially the principle 5. This talks about the business should respect and promote human rights. It's very, very crystal clear. And it's also asking for the business should promote inclusive growth and equitable development. And we know that the system is inclusive growth is, if you unpack, there are several issues. That's where most of the time the civil society work comes in. So that's the context in which we're. I'll take a minute in terms of taking a story. Apart from working with the Change Alliance, I also associate with the civil society organizations like FIA Foundation. And the FIA Foundation is working in partnership with the government of Jharkhand, especially during the lockdown time, helping migrant workers and managing their helpline. And this particular story was also published in the scrolls. I have taken up as some part, but it was facilitated by my team based in Ranchi. There are about 18 women have been rescued. So they are sent a distress call to our helpline and the state with the support of governments, both in Jharkhand as well as in Tamil Nadu. Those women have been rescued and they have come back home united with the family, but they refuse to go back. And deep in the line, if you unpack what exactly the issues, it's the same kind of a story of a deep apathy and what kind of exploitative conditions in which they are forced to work. And it's about the promising wages, which is not paid. And when they are in a very dire situation of a crisis due to the lockdown as well as the COVID, no assistance have been offered, very, very less. So it's primarily they have to depend on the civil society and the local state government to provide the support. So the whole aspect, it's all tribal women traveling all the way from Jharkhand to down south, Tamil Nadu, and they dare to cross the boundaries in order to meet their own dreams of being independent and want to work and they want to earn and look after the well-being of their families and their self. But when they try to take their decision to step out into a formal, I'm not talking about informal sector, I'm talking about this particular women's stories about working in a formal sector where the systems fail. There are various laws, but that not put to practice. And some of the companies may be well reputed, but not necessarily all the due diligence that have been taken up was actually administered properly. So there are a lot of loopholes that actually making the woman, a tribal woman, a single mother, a young daughter who want to unleash her own dream to become an independent is just tarnished because of the failure of the systems. This is where the civil society come back. I'm not saying that each and every factory or every place or every value chain remains the same. We also know that during the entire crisis time, about close to 800,000 workers have been assisted through the helpline in Jharkhand alone, and several of them have gone back to the work. So there must be many of them having a good experiences. Therefore, I'm not trying to generalize, but there are mixed reaction. It's all like half glass full and half glass empty. We need to look. The issues are not, I'm not going to read each and everything, but we all know what kind of challenges are. The biggest is unethical recruitment practices. The moment the woman, the worker leaves the village, they're leaving with a different, two kinds of promise of a different nature, but what it executed is a completely different, unethical recruitment process, and extremely working in a very, very hostile working condition. Bharti has actually mentioned during the presentation. When it comes to the woman, it is extremely hostile environment due to the patriarchy and due to issues of caste and ethnicity and the gender-based violence, and the challenges faced them are extremely difficult. So under these conditions, so therefore it is important, and apart from that, I think one of the recommendations Bharti mentioned about freedom of association and the choice, whether even in the formal sector, the freedom of association is very, very hardly realized. I think it is important. And when we try to look into the various awareness level of the workers, it's very, very new. So these are all the lot of challenges. I'm only listing the few, but not necessarily we are aware of that. But it's not mean that I want to say only the problem side, but we also had a good experience, at least as a change alliance. We partnered with a couple of years ago with the support from the British High Commission, Marks and Spencer, Superdry, and a couple of two other high street brands. We implemented a program called Promoting Gender Equality in the Garment Sector, both in Delhi, NCR, Bangalore, Chennai, a couple of selected factories. What it has showed me is when we do a practice like looking into the brands coming in, suppliers coming in, factories coming in, workers are actively participating, and civil society fostering that kind of an engagement, a lot of things are possible. And I myself have worked on it, my team worked on it, and we have experienced that positive changes are possible. And it's all about what we have seen is enhanced knowledge and awareness about their practices and constituting the compliance as per the compliance post committee awareness level. And also what is the major shift we have seen is previously the informal recruitment process have become People have got and offered the proper contracts, wages clearly mentioned, and there's a grievance redressal mechanism, which was there on the paper, what's not instituted, that has been shared. So the story that I'm trying to bring is about when you work in a collaboration, bring together all the stakeholders together, the positive changes are possible. And we work not in a one factory, it's about across the 2 to 3 years of time with several factories and the brands coming together, working on the issues of gender equality has resulted in several positive takeovers. Yes, there are challenges, but we have overcome that. But that's the positive story just I want to be. But apart from that, the last 2 years, we know that the pandemic has unleashed a massive tragedy of disproportions. But during that time, very recently, we have conducted a study primarily looking into the migrant workers, especially working in the garment sector in the 3 northern states, including Delhi NCR. And this particular study, we did not do it within the factory, but we did it outside the factory premises, where the very, very shocking stories in terms of the experiences they have gone during this kind of a process, where many people have not received the wages, they have not received proper support, and majority of them, almost 66% plus people saying that they have taken loans, they have not yet paid, and they're looking forward to repay their debt, but they don't have an income source, they're struggling. So what it happens is when a situation of a magnitude of a COVID pandemic hit, there is issues where the stakeholder need to respond. But what the study findings shown us is very little was done. Yes, there are some good inspiring stories as well, but I think majority of the respondents, when they shared their stories, it really is a heart-wrenching stories, and one need to be reflecting very clearly how we can able to neglect or ignore the people who are building our economy, who are strengthening our business process, who are very important value chain across the sector, but yet not taken care during the time of crisis that required. I would like to take this particular slide related to the qualitative aspect. Quantitative data is too much, that's why I'm not dealing with. We try to get the voices from the different stakeholders. What a women migrant workers, that's the first paragraph, is all about. I thought of editing this particular sentence, I decided not to do, because it is their voices. What promises have been given, but how this was systematically violated over a period of time across the sector. It's not relating to a sector. These migrant workers worked in a different kind of sector. So therefore, we are not related to a particular brand or a particular state or a particular factory. So it is a very generic where the workers, the experiences faced by the women workers, what they have experienced during the crisis and the post-lockdown process. And of course, the workers' representatives, they also talked about that how there is a serious issues related to health and how they face the harassment and the discrimination, and especially the lack of access to social security and social protection, which is a very, very important aspect. It's not that the representatives are not aware, they're very much aware, but they're trying to do. And of course, there is a various stakeholders try to respond, but what it sees is that at the time of crisis, somehow we did not take care of the people. And this is the last one, just I would like to put, since I know that majority of the participants come from the sector and also includes the representative from the brands. And this is some of the recommendation we try to do it as a part of our study. I think the important aspect which we would like to make it is that make part of all contracts and orders that violate human rights, unfair treatment, or harassment, or anything fallen, a non-compliance of the law, not only just leading to the cancellation of the orders, but I think it's important that you notify that kind of a non-compliance of the factories across the sector. So all the brands are aware of that. So there is no need for each one to go and try to find what is the price. And second is the grievance redressal mechanism is a very important point. Somehow it is not effectively implemented. That's something which the brands need to look into that. The third aspect is incentivization. When we were talking about the gender equality program that we implemented, one of the feedback that I have received from the factories saying that, yes, we are doing, but there are several people are not doing anything. But when it comes to the procurement, it doesn't make any difference. So the question is, those who are doing effectively and showing the responsible business practices, respecting the laws, how do we incentivize? I think somewhere we need to, the brands have a role to play. How do we incentivize, promote that kind of good practices? and also working with the state so that it is not only just the responsibility of the banks alone. You have a convening power. You have a power to engage and exchange ideas with the state so that how we can influence the larger practice of the state. This is my last slide, which is more, I think I would like to make a point. When we're talking about the migrant workers who are the lowest in the value chain, we need to understand whether the issues of bonded labor, modern slavery, trafficking, migration, these are all very, very complex developmental challenges. That's why civil society is very passionate to address these issues. And it requires a strategic patience investment. People who have not gone through some of the primitive tribal work, PVTGs groups, when they do not even have the currency economy. So when they are traveling, coming away from their own villages, secure places to come, there is a responsibility on the part of each one of us. How do we take care of? These are all structural causes of poverty. And the vulnerabilities are different to the different kind of people. We cannot assume just they come as a worker, but there is a story behind. That's where the responsibility lies on all of us. How do we take care of that? If you do not know, please involve the civil society. I'm not saying that all the civil society are the best. Yes, there are different, like in the sector, there are several kind of organizations that exist. But I think the organizations working on the human rights who are very closely engaged on these issues, I think we need to look into that issue. We can involve them during the social audit. That's a very important process where you will identify where the gaps and how can you do that. And how do we institutionalize more in terms of bringing the business and human rights? The framework is very clear. And it's talking about the respecting and protecting the human rights and also the compliance of the law. That is something which one we need to take. If you cannot do the harm, at least don't do the harm. So do no harm is the principle that we need to take. We have the business and human rights principles. We have national voluntary guidelines. Framework is there. Various laws that exist. What it requires is respect and compliance of those laws. There are several best practices. We need to take the best practices out, but not the bad practices. And if we can do it together, working in partnership, every stakeholder has a work to do. And there I see there is a role for the workers' organization, the civil society, the business network, everybody has to do. And if we come together and do, we can build a better world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, your insight and your stories. They're extremely valuable because it's really interesting to understand all the aspects that all of us have, especially through the different elements of the supply chain. So thank you. Apologies if you were getting a mixed connection through there. The audio is coming up and down in parts, but hopefully you're still able to hear with good listening. If you have any questions, please connect with our speakers in the virtual lounge. But again, I'd just like to thank both of you for your efforts and energy in today's conference. Thank you so much. Our final panel session will start shortly, so please select the join session button in the agenda. And thank you so much. But I would really like to echo the message here is that every stakeholder has a role to play, and hopefully you can all take that away with you as you consider your actions going forward. We're going to stop the stream now here, and we will move over to the next panel. Thank you so much, everyone.